The Mafia boss heard her say, "I've never been touched," then set the terms. I don't usually tell stories starting at the middle, but this one demands it, because the beginning, the real beginning, only makes sense once you understand what I was standing in the middle of. So here, this is where you find me. His penthouse, 42 floors above Manhattan, the city burning orange and white beneath a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass. A crystal glass of untouched wine in my hand, silk against my skin that costs more than my rent ever did. And the scent of him, cedar, leather, something dark I never learned the name of, drifting from the chair behind me. I haven't turned around yet. I make myself count to 10 first. A trick I learned waiting tables. Count when your hands shake and the tremble stops before anyone notices. 1, 2, 3. I hear the low drag of a page turning. He's reading. He's always reading when he wants me to feel like I'm not being watched. He's always watching. 4, 5. My name is Aurelia Voss, 26 years old, once a waitress at a midtown cafe, then a cocktail server at a club I never should have set foot in. The daughter of a man who loved gambling more than he loved me, and who loved me more than he ever loved himself, not that it helped either of us when the bill came due. The bill. $1 million. That's what Harlan Voss owed the Nero family when I walked into the Velvet Eclipse for my first shift. $1 million in gambling debts, interest, and whatever cruel arithmetic men like these applied to men like my father. I knew the number. I'd seen it in the notification he'd left open on his phone, a message that was less a message and more a sentence. Pay or suffer consequences. I took the job to help. Stupid, right? Naive. The kind of thing a girl does when she still believes proximity to danger means control over it. 6, 7. The Velvet Eclipse was beautiful the way a Venus flytrap is beautiful. Crystal chandeliers that turned every face golden. Low music that moved through the floor and up your spine. Men in bespoke suits who laughed at things that weren't funny and signed things without reading them. I served their drinks and kept my eyes down and told myself I was invisible. I was wrong about that, too. 3 weeks in, a Thursday, the club pulsed late and the private section had been rented by a consortium of men whose names meant nothing to me yet. I was clearing a table near the mezzanine stairs when one of them, low-level, drunk on his own proximity to power, grabbed my wrist, hard enough that the bones ground together. His breath was Scotch and arrogance. "Come on, Principessa, let me ruin that pretty innocence." I yanked back, my wrist came free, and the words that rose in me weren't calculated, they were reflex. Panic, the kind of truth that surfaces when the body bypasses the brain entirely. I've never been touched. 3 words, said to no one, said to everyone. The music didn't stop, the room didn't freeze. Nothing cinematic happened in that moment except this. Somewhere behind one-way glass on the mezzanine level, a man set down his glass. I didn't know that yet. I only found out later when Luca told me, in that dry way of his, that the boss had been still for a full 30 seconds after. That it was the only time in 3 years he'd seen Ettore Nero go completely still. 8, 9, 10. I turn around. He's watching me over the top of his book, those black eyes cutting through the low light of the room like they need no help from it at all. Don Ettore Nero, Il Fantasma. 6'4" of perfectly still danger, silver threading the dark hair at his temples, a jaw that looks like it was carved by someone who hated softness. He doesn't smile. He just looks at me. "Come sit down, Aurelia." Not an invitation, a sentence that's already happened. I walk toward him, and I think, this is exactly how it started. And somehow, God help me, this is not how it ends. Comment below. If a man like Ettore told you to sit down in that voice, do you walk toward him or toward the door? Tell me the truth. If this world already has you by the throat, a quick subscribe keeps the darkness coming. We're just getting started. Let me take you back. 48 hours before I turned around in that penthouse, before any of this had a name. The call came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, my phone buzzing against the nightstand until I grabbed it with the clumsy fury of someone who hasn't slept enough in weeks. The voice on the other end wasn't my father's. It was a woman from Mercy General, calm the way only people who deliver bad news professionally are calm. My father had been admitted overnight. Chest pains, possible cardiac event. He was stable. She used that word gently, like a pillow over a hard truth, but the tests would take time and someone needed to come. I was at the hospital in 40 minutes.
Harlan Voss looked smaller in a hospital bed than I'd ever seen him. He'd always been a large man, not imposing, but present, the kind of man who fills a doorframe and makes every room feel warmer just by arriving. Now he was pale and diminished against white sheets, tubes taped to his arm, monitors beeping out the uneven music of his heart. He tried to smile when I walked in. "Ori, you didn't have to. Don't." I sat beside him, took his hand. He was warm, which I needed. That warmth was the only thing between me and a particular kind of terror I hadn't let myself feel since I was 17, and first understood that my father was not the man I'd believed him to be. My mother left when I was 8. She said she loved us both, but couldn't stay. The chaos of him, the debts, the way good intentions dissolved every time they came near a card table. I didn't understand it then. I understand it now with a clarity that sometimes feels like a wound. But I stayed, because he was all I had, and I was stubborn enough, or broken enough, or both, to believe that love was something you earned by not leaving. "The debt," I said, quietly, watching his face. "It's gotten worse, hasn't it?" Not a question. His eyes did something complicated. The answer was in the way he looked at the ceiling instead of me. "I was going to fix it," he said. "There was an opportunity. Dad." He stopped. We both knew the grammar of this conversation. He'd been going to fix it for 15 years. When the doctor came in an hour later, young, direct, with the kind of eyes that had learned not to sugarcoat, he told us the chest event had been severe enough to warrant monitoring. "The stress," he said, looking carefully at my father, "whatever was causing it needed to be removed, immediately and completely." I drove home through morning traffic telling myself I was fine, telling myself I would figure it out, that I'd pick up more shifts, I'd talk to someone at the club about an advance. I would somehow find a way to dismantle $1 million debt on a cocktail server's salary through sheer force of will and terror. By the time I'd parked the car, I knew none of that was true. I sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes. Then I went upstairs, put on my uniform, and went back to work. The Velvet Eclipse on a Tuesday night was quieter. The private section was dark, most tables half full. I moved through my section with the precision of someone trying to outpace their own thoughts. Take order, deliver drink, clear glass, smile, do not think, do not think, do not think. That's when I noticed them noticing me. Not in the way men usually noticed. This was different. 2 of the larger security staff, men I'd seen before but never interacted with, had positioned themselves at opposite edges of my section, not watching the room, watching me. When I glanced up at the mezzanine window, habit by then, the dark glass reflected nothing back. Luca Bertelli appeared at my elbow at 9:15, quiet, impeccable, the kind of man who could stand in a room for an hour before you consciously registered him. Mr. Nero would like a moment of your time. Not a request. The grammar of this world was already becoming familiar to me. I set my tray down, smoothed my uniform, followed him up the mezzanine stairs with my heart doing something unpleasant behind my ribs. The private room was dim, lit by the glow of the city through floor-to-ceiling glass. A single table, a decanter of something amber, and him. Don Ettore Nero sat like the room had been built around him, one hand resting on the table, fingers loose. His suit was charcoal. His eyes, when they lifted to mine, were the color of deep water, dark and still and impossible to read the bottom of. He looked at me for a long moment without speaking, then, "Sit down." And I did. He didn't offer pleasantries, didn't pour wine or make small talk or do any of the things I might have expected from a man in a room like this with a woman like me. He opened a folder. My life, apparently, had been reduced to about 12 pages. Bank statements, hospital admission records, my father's from last night, time-stamped 2:47 a.m., my employment history, my lease, the number, $1,042,000, outlined in a column of figures with a composure that made it look reasonable. He slid it across the table. "Your father's debt to my family," Ettore said, "in full, as of this morning." I stared at the number. I'd known it, hearing it out loud, seeing it in ink on a page, clinical and immovable, was something different, something final. "I'm aware," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. "Then you're aware that at current repayment capacity, he would never pay it off." "Yes." Ettore looked at me, not with cruelty, with something worse. Patience. The look of a man who has already decided what happens next and is now simply allowing you to catch up. "I have a proposal." Of course he did. "The debt disappears tonight. Every figure erased. Your father retains his health, his apartment, his safety. Permanently." I waited. The other's shoe. "In exchange, you come to live in my residence. You follow rules I will give you. You will be present when I require it. You will appear at events on my arm when I need a companion. You will answer to no other man. Protection will be provided. And I—" He paused, and something in the pause made my skin tighten. "Will not touch you until I decide both of us are ready." The silence stretched. I processed the sentence in pieces. "You heard what I said. In the club." "I hear everything in my club." I looked at him. He looked back, unwavering, unashamed. You're asking me to live in your home. As what, exactly?" "As mine." 2 syllables, delivered without inflection. The most frightening sentence I'd ever heard precisely because of how calm it was. "And if I refuse?" "Your father's heart condition will be managed under significant financial strain. The debt collectors will begin contact within 72 hours. Men who are not me and do not share my particular interest in your well-being." It wasn't a threat. It was a weather report. The storm exists whether you believe in it or not. I studied his face, looking for something, malice, hunger, the sneering satisfaction of a powerful man baiting a trap. But there was nothing readable there.
Just those dark eyes and that impossible patience, and the sense that he had already lived through this conversation in his mind and was simply waiting for reality to align. "You'll actually leave me alone?" I said. "Until I decide otherwise. Until we both decide," I said. A correction, testing whether there was any negotiating surface here at all. Something shifted in his expression, microscopic, but there. "Until we both decide," he agreed. I looked at the folder, at my father's name in print, at the number. I thought of the hospital room, the pale diminishment of him, the doctor's careful eyes. "I want the agreement in writing." "Obviously." "And my own bedroom, with a lock." "The lock is cosmetic. I could remove every door in this building and replace it with glass. But yes, your own room." It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me, and somehow that made it worse. I took the pen he slid across the table. I signed. Luca appeared at the door 40 seconds later. He must have been waiting. Of course, he'd been waiting. This was a man whose entire operation ran on choreography. "The car is ready," Luca said. I stood, straightened my uniform for the last time I would ever wear it. "I'll need to get my things." "Your things have already been collected. Everything you need is in the residence." I stopped. "You were certain I'd say yes." "I was prepared for both outcomes," Ettore said, lifting his glass. "I simply preferred one." Comment below. She's signed. Would you have? Or would you have found another way? And what would that way even look like in a world like this? The penthouse was obscene. I don't mean that cruelly. I mean it the way you mean it when beauty has been scaled past the point of comfort, when it crosses from livable into architectural intimidation. The elevator opened directly into it, a sweep of marble and dark wood and glass so clean it looked like the city was painted on air. Art on the walls that I suspected cost more than my childhood home. Flowers, actual fresh flowers, on a console table near the entrance, white and scentless and perfect. Luca showed me to a room that was larger than my entire apartment. The bed was dressed in ivory. A closet opened to reveal clothes already hanging, my size, neutral colors, nothing flashy, everything expensive. A vanity with a single orchid in a black vase. "Mr. Nero's stylist made preliminary selections," Luca said. "If anything is unsuitable, it's fine," I said, because I didn't have the energy to locate the exact nature of my objection. There was a lock on my door, a real one. I tested it twice after Luca left.
Then I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought, this is real. This is actually happening. You are in the home of a man who runs a criminal empire because your father couldn't stop himself at a card table, and you signed a piece of paper agreeing to belong to him until further notice. I didn't cry. I'd cried enough in hospital parking lots and car seats. I pressed my palms to my knees and breathed. The first morning arrived with pale winter light and a knock, light, twice, at 7:30. I opened the door to a woman who introduced herself as Mara, who managed the residence, and who handed me a schedule with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd been briefed. Breakfast was served at 8. Mr. Nero breakfasted at 8:15. There were no requirements for attendance, but the kitchen was stocked to her specifications and, "I'll eat at 8, I said. Something in me refused to eat alone in my room like a prisoner. Mara nodded and left. I dressed, went to the kitchen, sat at the long table with coffee and something beautiful that turned out to taste as good as it looked, and I was halfway through it when he appeared. Ettore Nero at 7:50 in the morning wore a dark suit, no tie, collar open at the throat. He carried a phone and a small file, and he did not look surprised to see me there, which meant, I realized, that Mara had told him, or that he'd known before Mara had the chance. He sat across from me, poured coffee, read his file. The silence was not uncomfortable. That was the first strange thing. I'd expected awkwardness, the weird proximity of strangers forced together, but he inhabited silence the way most people inhabit conversation, easily, naturally, like the quiet was his preferred medium. After 10 minutes, he said, without looking up, "Your father was discharged this morning. He's been moved to a private suite at Lenox Hill for continued monitoring. His bills have been handled." I set my coffee down. "You did that already?" "Last night." I didn't know what to do with that. The efficient tenderness of it, if that's even a coherent pairing of words. He had erased my father's debt and installed him in a better hospital in the same window of time that I'd been trying to sleep. "Can I visit him?" "When I'm not requiring your presence." "Which is when?" Now he looked up. That direct look that I was beginning to understand wasn't scrutiny. It was attention. Full, undivided, slightly destabilizing. "This weekend. I'll have Luca drive you." I nodded, picked up my coffee, and tried to understand how gratitude and captivity could feel so interchangeable. The first week passed in a careful choreography. I learned his rhythms without meaning to. The early mornings, the late nights, the way he moved through the apartment like a ship cutting water, unhurried but always in motion. I learned that he liked the windows dark in the evenings and bright in the mornings, that he read physical books but kept his phone on him like an extension of his arm, that he never raised his voice, that he didn't need to. I learned, against my better judgment, that he watched me the way no one had ever watched me before, not predatorily, not possessively, or not only possessively, with something that felt closer to curiosity, like I was a problem he was in no hurry to solve. On Friday, Luca drove me to the hospital. My father was sitting up when I arrived, color returned to his face, a terrible chat show playing on the television above his bed. He looked at me when I walked in, looked at my coat, which was Ettore's stylist's doing, and at the car he'd glimpsed through the window, and his expression did something complicated. "Ori." "He kept his word," I said, sitting beside him. "The debt is gone. You're safe. That's what matters." "What did you give him?" The question landed between us like something dropped. I looked at my father, this man I loved past the point of wisdom, and I thought of the hospital bed, the monitors, the doctor's careful words. I thought of the pieces of paper I'd signed. "Time," I said. It was true enough. 14 days in, I stopped being afraid of him constantly and started being afraid of myself. That's harder to manage. The fear of him had been clean, at least, logical. Here is a dangerous man. Here is your proximity to him. Here is the appropriate response. But the fear of myself arrived sideways and without warning, and it wore his face. It happened gradually, the way real things always do. First, it was small. The way I noticed the particular quality of his attention when he looked up from his reading. The way the apartment felt different on the evenings he came home late. Fuller somehow, like air pressure changing before a storm. The way I'd started choosing the chair nearest the window because it was nearest to where he usually sat, and the several minutes it took me one evening to register that I'd done it. Then, less small, he'd established a rule in the first week. No locked doors between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Not a salacious rule. He didn't come to my room. He simply needed, he said, to know that nothing in this apartment was closed to him. I'd bristled at it. I still bristled at it. But I'd stopped reaching for the lock before I slept. One night, I woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of rain against the glass. I lay in the dark listening to it, that particular New York rain that sounds like it has opinions. And then I realized there was a light under my door. He was awake. I don't know what possessed me. Something between restlessness and the particular recklessness that lives in 2 in the morning. I got up, put on the robe that had appeared in my closet without discussion, opened my door. He was in the living room, standing at the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a glass in his hand. He didn't turn when I appeared, but his voice reached me immediately. "Couldn't sleep?" "The rain." "It does that here. The building's height catches it differently." I came to stand at the other end of the window. The city below was all wet light and ghost traffic, beautiful and alien. We stood like that for a while. The rain, the city, him 3 feet from me, a warmth I could feel at that distance, like proximity to a low fire. "Tell me something true," I said. I don't know why. Middle of the night honesty, maybe. The kind that lives outside the rules of daylight. He was quiet long enough that I thought he'd refuse. Then, "I've been alone for a long time." By choice. By design, which isn't the same thing. I thought about that, the distinction. Do you regret it? I regret some of what the design required. He turned then, and I realized I'd made an error in the geometry of the moment. I'd drifted closer while we talked, pulled by gravity I hadn't been monitoring, and now he was very near. Close enough that I could see the line of exhaustion around his eyes, which I'd never noticed in daylight. Close enough that when he raised his hand and, slowly, with extraordinary deliberateness, tucked a piece of hair behind my ear, there was no time to step back. His fingers brushed my temple. Just that. Just the edge of contact. My breath left. He let his hand drop. "Go back to sleep, Aurelia." His voice was rough, low. The voice of a man exercising significant restraint in a small apartment at 2 in the morning, while the rain said whatever the rain was saying. I went back to my room, lay down, stared at the ceiling. I pressed my fingertips to the place where he'd touched me. It burned. I told myself it was because I was tired, because I'd been in proximity to power so long it had started to feel like heat instead of danger. I told myself a lot of things that night. None of them were entirely true. The next morning, he sat across from me at breakfast and was entirely, professionally, maddeningly normal. Read his papers, drank his coffee, asked me, without looking up, whether there was anything I needed for the week. "I'd like to go outside," I said. "You're not a prisoner, Aurelia." "You have 2 men on me every time I enter the elevator." "That's not imprisonment. That's protection." It feels like the same thing from the inside. He set his paper down, looked at me with that full, quiet attention. "Where would you like to go?" I thought of the park near my old apartment, the bookshop on West 83rd, the coffee place with the bad chairs that made excellent espresso. My whole former life 2 miles away and 3 worlds distant. Somewhere with trees. He nodded. "Saturday. I'll come." Not, "I'll have someone take you." I'll come. Something in my chest did something inadvisable. I looked back at my coffee and didn't examine it too closely. Comment below. That 2 a.m. moment. The hair, the touch, the restraint. Was that more romantic to you than a grand gesture would have been? Or does the control itself scare you? He came on Saturday. Central Park in January is a different animal than Central Park in any other season. Stripped down, honest, the skeleton of the place showing through bare trees. I liked it. It was the park without performance. Ettore walked beside me in a dark coat, hands in his pockets, two shadows trailing at a distance that was respectful enough to feel like privacy. We didn't talk much. He'd brought coffee from somewhere that wasn't the apartment and handed me mine without asking how I took it, which meant he already knew. I should have found that unsettling. Instead, I thought, he pays attention. He has been paying attention this whole time. He pointed out things: a hawk on a bare elm, the particular quality of light on the reservoir. Not tourist attractions, small things, private things, the kind of details that require actually looking. I thought, who is this man? Not the one in the folder, not Il Fantasma. Who is the man who notices hawks? The answer arrived 2 days later, from a direction I hadn't expected. Luca. He knocked on the door of the study, the small one off the hallway that I'd claimed as mine by virtue of the bookshelves, at 10 in the evening. Ettore was out. Some meeting that required his physical presence and Luca's absence, which was unusual enough that I'd noticed. Luca stood in the doorway looking like a man carrying something he wasn't sure he should be carrying. "I need to show you something." He set a folder on the desk, thicker than the one Ettore had shown me. Older paper, some of it. Photographs. I opened it. The first page was a photograph of two men. One was Ettore, younger, maybe 24 or 25, wearing something less expensive than he wore now. The other was a young man I didn't recognize, dark-haired, laughing at something outside the frame, with a jaw that echoed Ettore's closely enough to confirm what the caption confirmed. Marco Nero, younger brother. I turned the page. Police report. A night 6 years ago. Marco Nero, 21, found in a warehouse in Red Hook. The cause listed in clinical language that didn't soften what it meant. The rival organization implicated, the Scarlatti family. I turned another page. Financial records, my father's. Not the gambling debts, older transactions. Wire transfers 6 years ago to accounts in the Scarlatti network. Dates that aligned. I sat very still. "My father," I said. Not a question. "He sold information," Luca said. His voice was even, not cruel. "He was in debt to both families at the time. The Scarlattis offered to reduce his debt if he passed along movement information, routes, schedules. He didn't know, or says he didn't know, that it was Marco specifically who was being targeted." I kept looking at the photograph, the laughing young man. "Ettore knows this." "Ettore has known this for 6 years." The room reoriented around that sentence. I felt it physically, a shift, like the floor recalibrating. The debt, the arrangement, this wasn't about money. It was never about money. Luca was quiet. "Then what is it about?" He looked at me for a moment. "I believe," he said carefully, "that it began as something else, and became something he didn't anticipate." I closed the folder. He left. I sat in the study until I heard the elevator, his elevator, at 11:45. His footsteps, the sound of him in the kitchen, the light changing under the door. I opened the study door and walked toward the kitchen and turned the corner, and he was there, his jacket over a chair, a glass of water in his hand, and he turned when he heard me and stopped, because my face told him everything. He was a man who read rooms for survival. He read my face in less than a second. "Luca," he said, not angrily, resolvedly. "You used me," I said. My voice was level only because rage has a particular stillness to it when it's deep enough. "Your father. Don't. Tell me about your brother."
Something happened in his expression. The controlled surface didn't break, it submerged, and what replaced it was rawer than I'd seen from him. A grief so old it had become architectural, part of the structure of him. Marco was 21, he said. He wanted out. He wanted to study architecture. I was going to give him that. I had it arranged. The kitchen was very quiet. Your father's information gave them his location the night before he was supposed to leave. I pressed my back against the wall. My hands were shaking. And me. I was the... what? The revenge. You were the debt. That's not different. No, he said. It's not. He didn't apologize. I wasn't sure I wanted him to. An apology would have made it tidier than it was. Why did Luca show me? Because he's more loyal to my future than to my past. I looked at him. The brother's ghost between us. My father's name on a wire transfer. The weeks of careful distance. The 2 a.m. rain. The coffee in the park. The hawk on the elm. I don't know what to do with this, I said. Neither do I, he said. And it was the most human thing I'd ever heard him say. I didn't leave. I want to be honest about that, not noble. I didn't stay because I'd found peace with what I knew. I stayed because my father was still in that private hospital room, because the city outside was not safer than the penthouse, and because something in me had looked at Ettore's face in that kitchen and recognized a man who was carrying grief as heavy as my own and didn't know how to set it down. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was the decision to remain in the same room as the question. He didn't explain himself further. He didn't try. He simply resumed the life of the apartment. Breakfasts, careful silence, the occasional evening where we occupied the same space reading, but with a new texture to the air between us. The pretense had been removed. We both knew now what this was and what it had been and what it might still become. And that knowledge sat between us like a window thrown open onto cold air.
He worked more than I'd realized. Long days, late evenings, calls in Italian or Sicilian dialect that I caught edges of without understanding the center. Luca moved through the apartment like a tide, always arriving with information, always leaving with instructions. Men I didn't know came and went through a service entrance. The world he ran pressed against the walls of the penthouse without ever quite entering it. I asked him about it once, on one of those evenings. He'd been reading something that wasn't a book. Documents looked like reports, and he glanced up with the specific attention he gave me. "Do you want to know?" he asked. "Or do you want to understand?" Is there a difference? Knowing protects you. Understanding makes you part of it. I thought about that. Tell me one true thing about the business. One thing I could know. He considered. The ports, he said. We control 6 of the 12 major freight channels into this city. That means the things people need actually arrive. Medical equipment, food supply chains, certain critical materials. The city functions partly because we allow it to. The alternative has historically been worse. That's a very elegant framing of crime. Most power is. It was, infuriatingly, a reasonable point. The threat arrived on a Thursday, buried in an intelligence report that Luca brought to Ettore over dinner. I was at the other end of the table. I wasn't supposed to see his expression change, but I did. Something tightening behind the eyes, very brief, very controlled. After Luca left, he looked at me. Marco Scarlatti is making movements. Il serpente. You know the name. Luca's file. He nodded, set his fork down. He's been watching the penthouse, the building. There are photographs of you, outside, arriving at the hospital to visit your father. My blood went cold. Why me? Because you're mine. Said simply, not possessively the way it might have felt 3 weeks ago. As statement of fact, as responsibility. And he wants to hurt you. He wants leverage, the same thing he always wants. I thought of the warehouse in Red Hook, the young man who'd wanted to study architecture. This is because of Marco, your brother. Partly. And partly because I've been consolidating territory he considers his. What happens now? He looked at me steadily. Your movements become more restricted, temporarily. How restricted? This floor, until I've resolved this. I looked at the city out the window, the world at a remove. Resolved? That's a word. It's the appropriate one. I thought of my father, of the hospital, of Scarlatti's men photographing me on the street. I trust you to fix it, I said. He looked at me like I'd said something in a language he was just beginning to learn. Comment below. She said, I trust you to fix it. After everything she knows, the brother, the revenge, the beginning. Can you understand why? Or does she lose you there? The restriction held for 4 days. 4 days of the penthouse as its own entire country. The kitchen, the study, the long living room. The view from 42 floors as the only window onto a world that continued turning without us. He worked from home those days. I hadn't expected that. I'd expected to be installed behind the walls and left to manage myself while he moved through the danger on the other side of them. Instead, he was simply present, working at his desk with the door open, moving through the kitchen at odd hours for coffee, reading in the evenings in the same chair. Proximity, extended, reveals things. I learned the small inventory of him, that he massaged the bridge of his nose when a call had gone badly, that he ate without speaking when he was thinking through a problem, that he laughed, rarely, and quiet, more breath than sound, at certain things in the books he read, and never explained what. On the third evening, I was at the piano, an elegant, probably priceless thing I'd been circling for days, picking out something half-remembered from childhood lessons my mother had paid for before she left. He came and stood in the doorway. I kept playing. Badly. After a while, he came and sat at the other end of the bench. Not close, but on the same bench, and listened. I was so aware of him that my fingers stumbled twice. He didn't comment. He just listened with that full attention of his, elbow on his knee, eyes somewhere past the keys. When I finished, he said, Chopin. You recognized it. Marco played. The ghost of his brother, arriving quietly in the music. I'm sorry, I said. For what your father did? No, for Marco. He was very still for a moment. He would have liked you, Ettore said. He liked people who were honest when it cost them something. I looked at the keys, at my hands on them. Do you think we can get past it? What the beginning was? He turned to look at me, close on this bench. Closer than usual, close enough that the warmth was there again, that low fire proximity. I think the beginning is the least interesting part of this. That's not an answer. It's the truest one I have. I looked at him. He looked at me. And then, slowly, deliberately, giving me every moment to move if I wanted to move, he reached up and traced the line of my jaw with the backs of his fingers. The same deliberateness as the night of the rain. but closer now. Longer. I didn't move. His thumb traced the edge of my lower lip. My breath went entirely. Aurelia. Yes? I'm going to kiss you, and when I do, it will be because we've both decided. I thought of the signed agreement, of the terms, of a man who had kept every one of his impossible words for 6 weeks while the city burned and his brother's ghost lived in the piano. I thought, this is not the beginning I was given, but it might be the one I'm choosing. Then we've both decided, I said. He kissed me slowly, carefully, like something he'd been holding in his hands for a long time and was finally allowing himself to feel. It tasted of coffee and restraint and 6 weeks of held breath released all at once. When he pulled back, he kept his forehead against mine, stayed there. His eyes were closed. I kept mine open so I could see him. This dangerous, quiet, grieving man who had planned to use me, and somewhere between the planning and the execution had been undone by his own terms. Now what? I said softly. Now, he said, we deal with Scarlatti. He pulled back, stood, and something in his posture was different. The restraint was still there. It was architectural in him, would always be. But something had been permitted through it. Something warm. And then? He looked back at me from the doorway. And then we figure out what this is. Properly. He left. I sat at the piano, alone in the dark apartment, the city glittering 42 floors below, and pressed my fingers to my lips where his mouth had been. Still burning. The 4th morning of the restriction, it ended, not by Ettore's resolution, but by Scarlatti's impatience. At 6 a.m., the building's security alert triggered. 2 men in the parking structure, a third at the service entrance. Luca's voice on the intercom, controlled and precise, was the first thing I heard. Mr. Nero needed to move to the interior room. Now. I was already awake. I'd heard the shift in the building, something you feel in a place before you hear it, a pressure change. I was dressed when Ettore came to my room, jacket on, firearm at his hip visible for the first time, his face the face of Il Fantasma. Every warmth of the past weeks locked behind the door of necessity. Interior room. Luca will stay with you. Ettore, interior room. His hands cupped my face for 1 second, just one. I will come back. Then he was gone. The next 40 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat in the interior room with Luca, who was armed, who sat near the door, who spoke quietly on comms in a language of codes I didn't understand. And I listened to what I could hear, which wasn't much, which was somehow worse than anything. Then Luca's posture changed. He touched his earpiece. Something moved in his expression. Relief, controlled, but real. It's done, he said. I was on my feet before he finished the sentence. Ettore was in the main corridor when I reached it. Jacket marked, a cut above his left brow seeping red that he hadn't addressed. 2 of his men were with him. He turned when he heard me, and his expression, usually so controlled, was briefly, entirely unguarded. I crossed to him, pressed my palm to the cut. You're bleeding. It's minor. It's your face. Something almost like a smile. Scarlatti? Luca answered from behind me. In custody. The DA will find the evidence package on his desk this morning. Historical charges, sufficient for a disappearance that looks legal. Ettore was looking at me. It's over, he said. I kept my hand against his face. He let me. We stood there in the corridor, the city beginning to lighten behind the windows, his blood warm against my palm. And I thought, 6 weeks ago, I walked into a private room and signed a piece of paper agreeing to belong to a dangerous man because I had no other choice. And here is the complicated, untidy, irrevocable truth. I would sign it again. Not because I had no choice, because I have, gradually, against every instinct and all available evidence, chosen this. Him. Whatever this dark and necessary thing is. 3 weeks later, I found out about the baby. I sat in the bathroom with a white stick and shaking hands, and a feeling that was not what I might have predicted. Not terror, not despair. Something more complicated. Something that required sitting with for a while before I could name it. I told him that evening, in the kitchen, directly. Because I had learned that this man did not need to be managed or softened toward truth. He needed to be trusted with it.
I'm pregnant.
He was very still. Then he set down what he was holding and turned to face me fully and asked, quiet, "Are you all right?" Not, "What do we do?" Not, "Are you sure?" "Are you all right?" "I think so," I said. "I think I will be." He crossed the kitchen and stood before me and, for the first time, standing upright, in daylight, in the middle of the kitchen, pulled me against him. Both arms, his chin at the top of my head, the solidity of him like a wall I hadn't known I'd needed. We stood like that for a long time. The traitor, when he surfaced, was one of Ettore's inner ring, a capo named Fiorelli who had fed Scarlatti's people the penthouse's building schematics. The discovery came through Luca's investigation, a thread pulled until the whole seam came loose. Ettore handled it personally and without spectacle, and I didn't ask for details, and he didn't offer them, and that was the language we were learning, the specific grammar of a life that required certain silences. What he did ask me, 6 weeks later, was this. He came into the study where I was reading, crouched before the chair so that he was looking up at me, deliberate, I thought, deliberate in a man who spent his life having others look up at him. "The terms," he said. "I set them once. You had no voice in it. I want you to set them now." I looked at him. This man, the grief he carried, the brother in the piano, the girl he'd planned to take as a debt, and the thing that had grown instead, complicated and real and, yes, mine. "Stay," I said. "That's it. Stay. Be honest with me. Let me be honest with you, and figure out the rest as we go." "That's not very precise." "No. I can work with it," he said. He took my hand, turned it over, pressed his mouth to the inside of my wrist, where the pulse lives, where everything is closest to the surface, and held it there. I thought of the night I'd stood in a hospital parking lot telling myself I would figure it out. The debt, the fear, the unsigned life. I thought, look what figuring it out looks like. It looks like a dangerous man on his knees in a study, holding your pulse in his hands like something he intends to protect. It looks like staying. Il Fantasma, they still called him. The Phantom. The man you never see coming. But I saw him. By the end, I saw every single part of him. And I stayed anyway. Darlings, that's the story of Aurelia Voss and Don Ettore Nero. The girl who said 3 impossible words in a room full of dangerous men. The phantom who heard them and set the terms, and then, quietly, against every design of his own construction, let those terms be rewritten by someone brave enough to stay. No story this dark ends in full light, but it can end in something true. That's the best kind of ending, I think. The kind you didn't see coming. the kind that cost something. If this story held you, if you're still here, breathing a little harder than when we started, then you already know you need more of this world. Hit subscribe. It genuinely keeps this darkness coming. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment you knew Aurelia had already fallen? Because I think it was before she did. Until next time, my darlings, stay in the shadows. They're warmer than you think.